Hello, my dear friend. How often do you feel rushed in your day as a parent? And how often are you questioning if you have a young child, whether or not they are getting the right kind of play or enough playtime? Well, if you can relate to all of these questions, then this episode is for you. My name is Cindy Hovington. I'm the host of this podcast. And today I have a special guest, Amy, who's going to be talking to us about the importance of play and how much we can learn through play. And if you are interested in this, I'm taking a different approach. So, halfway through this episode, I will be pausing to come back and talk to you about some insights that I gained by having this conversation with Amy. And the insights are more focused around us as the parent. Playtime is about our child. But what if we were to embrace a more slow type of living as parents? Would that actually open more playtime for our child? And so we're going to talk about that halfway through the episode. And at the end of this episode, I will be sharing a research study that I pulled out for you because, as you all know, everything here is based on science. I have a PhD in neuroscience, and the science is important for me. So there's an article that I want to share with you at the end. And so stay tuned if you want to hear about this science summary. The link to this article is in the show notes, as always. And everything to reach my guest is also in the summary. So if you are new here, welcome. I'm a mom of three from Montreal, Canada. And like I said, I have a PhD in neuroscience. I'm the founder and CEO of Curious Neuron. And I'm very, very grateful to be the host of this podcast as well and have the conversations that I have with so many different people. And today is a fun one. It's about play. And not only is it about play, but I'm going to take a different approach and also relate this to how this impacts us as the parent, because after having three kids and speaking to so many parents through Curious Neuron, I realized that many of us place a lot of pressure on ourselves for the right kinds of toys. And we don't realize that the right type of play probably consists of items you already have in your home. And so we're going to be talking about that with Amy, and open-ended play, which is not having any structure. That's another thing that we're going to talk about halfway through the episode. Sometimes a child's life is very structured, and it's in the unstructured moments and the free moments that they actually learn even more. And so I want to share all of that with you today. First, I'd like to thank the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute for supporting this podcast, as well as the McConnell Foundation. Both of these organizations believe in the importance of sharing science as I do. And so I'm very grateful to them and to you, the listener. We are seeing now this audience grow. And so if you want to share this podcast episode, you can do that whether you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or watching this on YouTube. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you've clicked on that subscribe button so that you get a notification for new episodes. You're going to notice that today's episode, usually episodes come out on Monday, but we are testing things out here at Curious Neuron. And so we're testing to see if this Sunday release of the episode might be better for you, because maybe you're out running groceries and you have a few minutes to listen to an episode. So we're hoping to see, we're hoping to help you listen to this in times that it's even more convenient. And more than that, you can visit curiousneuron.com to read some blog posts that we have and follow us on social media at curious_neuron. All right. So I want to get into this conversation because it's just such a fascinating conversation. But first, let's learn a little bit more about my guest. Today's guest is Amy Chiu. She has a master's in education, and for the past 18 years, she's been on this mission to redefine early childhood education. She's been putting community, nature, and play at the heart of how young children learn and grow. And so not only is she an early childhood educator and instructor, she is a speaker, and she is trying to change how we see play. And I love her approach. I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Amy as much as I did. I will see you halfway through this episode, like I said, to share some reflections, and at the end to share a science article. See you on the other side. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reflective Parenting Podcast. As promised in the intro, I am here with Amy. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
I was talking about in the intro, I mentioned how much I've been enjoying reading your posts on LinkedIn, and I wish that there were more, and I just want to take in as much as I can from you. I want to share my sort of process in preparing for a podcast episode. I try not to write too many questions because I want to listen to what you're going to have to share and get curious about it. That's the whole point of Curious Neuron. But I always write a focus. And so what I do is I consume some of the content and then think about the questions some of our parents here at Curious Neuron, whether it's within our membership the Reflective Parent Club or Instagram or the podcast, I think about the struggles that parents are talking about or some challenges that they have. And I try to marry both, like what your posts are and some questions that parents have. And I put a focus. So the focus that came up to mind for your content and our conversation today was slowing life down to let our kids be kids. Do you think that matches with what you kind of share with parents?
Yes, so much. And this is something that I've only embraced in the recent years, honestly, because I experienced my own professional and personal burnout.
Mm,
And I knew I had to find a different way. I was working so much, and then I was coming home not having the energy to meet my children what they needed. And it took some time for me to recover. And so
mm,
now I'm really vocal about slowing down in life and also in education because I see the benefits to both.
right.
I'm someone that needs this reminder, and this is why I'm also posting. It's not just for others, it's a reminder for myself to trust in
Hmm.
children's natural development, which is so hard to do. And as educators and parents, we always want to do more and more and more for our students and for our children. And sometimes I think, okay, but that's not working, just trying to fill them with things to do all day long. It's not working. It's not meeting their needs for downtime, first of all,
Hmm.
for time to process new learning, time to reflect, time to practice. All of this, literally have to sometimes sit on my hands or, just kind of stay a little bit quieter to give children time to work through their struggles without me trying to rescue them from these problems.
Mm. So I'd love to know a little bit about your journey. What led to those insights and the sort of realization that we need to slow things down, especially when it comes to education and a child's early education? With your role as an administrator, what led to this insight?
Yeah. So I started out as a classroom teacher, like many of us do. And so, when I was a brand new teacher, I was pretty much like by the book. I followed all of the school's regulations because I was a beginner. And now that I've had, more years of experience, I've realized that, okay, it's a framework to start from. But as I've learned, and I think a lot of us know this, there's no one right way to work with a child. They're all so different. We need to treat them as individuals. And so I realized to let go of control first and foremost because it just simply doesn't work.
Mm,
We want to have control of a situation. We want to control a child into, complying with our requests. But we just end up going into, these power struggles where no one wins. And so I
mm,
had to stop the madness, And so now, as a school administrator, I am in a position where I can model for my staff, for my teachers, a different way, which is great because I think it has to start with the leadership. It's hard to make changes if you're always coming up against people that are telling you no.
mhm,
But, when it's founded on a real understanding of children and child development, that's what I go back to. It's not just because I want to, it's because I understand now how children develop in the early years. And I really do want to slow down too, to really enjoy these moments. They are
mm,
so fleeting. I blinked and my children they're 16 and 21 now,
mm,
and I wish I could go back to that age where I could just cuddle them a little bit more and be
right.
more understanding when they fall apart because
Mm,
all those things matter. And, not only for them, for me as a parent, I'm just a good enough parent now, and that's good enough for me. Like I don't stress about perfection, although I still have those tendencies. I think a lot of us fight those tendencies. But to be a conscious educator and a conscious parent, I really had to let go of my adult expectations so I can
mm,
focus on this child in front of me who I'm trying to help, because it's really about them. Because when we make it, when we take their behaviors personally, then we make it about ourselves, and we kind of lose the reason why we're there, to support, to encourage. And so that's what I focus on now, the process rather than specific outcomes I'm trying to do. And that's
mm,
that's something that we always have to talk about with parents, and that's a lot of my work too. It's not just about working with children, is at the same time bring their parents in on this journey so that they can also appreciate childhood a little bit more and also stress less as a parent. All of these things, um, are connected, right? They're all
Mhm.
connected to each other. And so the more I can work on my own self understanding, the better I can help others too.
You mentioned something about resistance to change in education. I know that when I talk to some parents, we always want our kids to know how to recognize their letters faster. We want them to know how to read faster. When in the end, play, as you mentioned in so many in all your posts, there's so much learning that happens in play. And there was a bit of pushback here. I'm from Montreal, Canada. And when we introduced preschool, I think it was 3, 4 years ago now, there was a bit of resistance in terms of play-based learning. Are you still seeing that? Or I know there's definitely a big shift, but are you still seeing a bit of that resistance?
All the time. Yes, I
Ah,
do.
right. Okay.
I still,
Yeah.
when parents come tour our school, for example, before they decide to enroll, they always ask, right? How do you prepare children for kindergarten? For, what's
Mm.
school readiness like here?
Right.
And so
Yes.
I'm always having to field those questions. And it's not just at the beginning either, I also find that when children are getting ready to leave preschool, I get another round of questions from parents, but are they ready? Are they ready? And so there's a lot of worry and anxiety surrounding this. And so, I think, okay, it's because the school system, at least in the US, right? But I feel like I hear similar stories from all around the world, is just not made for children. They're not
Mm.
meeting their developmental needs. They were structured probably from a long time ago, and the world has changed drastically. And so we're still holding children to these rigid standards that were formed decades and decades and decades ago before they were even born. And so, we definitely need to see a change in education. But again, change is slow. So I
Mm.
think that's partially why I picked early childhood because, I don't have to teach to standards. I have some creative leeway. But of course, parents do still mostly think of the goal of preschool is socialization first of all, but also to get ready for academics. And I think that can happen so naturally through play. We don't need to force this learning. We can provide the right environment, attuned educators, people that notice development unfolding,
Mm.
without having to produce results such as answers on a worksheet. The learning is there, but we really have to practice observing our children without interrupting to see it unfold. Because oftentimes, too, we don't give children enough time to settle into their ideas and some experiment, and we interrupt. And then we think, oh, they're not learning anything. And I think, well, what if we just sat back a little bit more,
Mhm.
But this also means that we have to change our definition of what teaching and learning is. And so again, these are really big things that's going to take a lot of time to change people's minds about.
Mm.
But we're slowly making our way.
Right. So, how would you not convince, but kind of help a parent understand, or even educators that might be listening, in terms of the importance of play? You've talked about problem solving and creativity, deep thinking, and making connections on some of your posts. How does, I even think back to my own childhood. So, I grew up going to my grandmother's house, and I would arrive at breakfast, and I would be outside in her backyard, and she'd come back at lunchtime to say, come and eat. And so that entire time I was by myself in her backyard, but those were my best memories. She had made like a little clothesline, and she would make clothes and sew. And so she'd make these little clothing items that I would wash in a bucket of water and soap. And then I would hang and pretend that I'm hanging the clothes. And then I would play in her garden and take some soil and put it in a bucket and put some rocks. There is learning in that on its own. How do you convince a parent that that is learning?
Oh, okay. So I think ongoing conversations, of course, and at our school, we do a lot of documenting. So we don't
Mm.
just show outcomes, we don't just post their finished work. We document the process of learning. We
Hmm.
capture the children's questions and ideas in their words. And so we build on this process and show parents a fuller picture of what learning is. Um, I want to speak to, these really strong, vivid childhood memories that bring so much joy. They evoke so much joy when we remember them, right? And I think many of us have those memories.
Hmm.
We grew up in a time, I also grew up in a time where I was given so much freedom to just be with my peers, people my own age and invent games and explore without an adult hovering. And so I also too appreciate that I had that experience so I can draw from that now, because I think for many children today, that's not the case.
Mm.
And so there is something wonderful about just playing in dirt, okay? Like, and a lot of people might think, well, okay, that's fun, but where is the learning? And I think
Yeah.
that's where we need to slow down and really dissect what's happening in front of us. Okay, a child playing in dirt, digging in dirt, right? Okay, they're learning about the properties of dirt, how much pressure they have to apply to make a hole, what's in the hole. They're making observations. They're talking about what happens if I dig this way, or what happens if I dig deeper? What happens if I add water?
Mhm.
They're completely engaged in the same process, right? Whereas if we put a child in front of a worksheet and say, this is, we're going to learn about dirt today, that's a whole different process. And, it's not as connected, it's not as personally meaningful. And so we really need to look at play as something that children naturally do, which is a really wonderful vehicle for learning because they are already curious. We don't need to make them curious. We don't need
Yes.
to
Yeah.
make them learn. They already have it in spades. In fact, we adults, right? We lose our curiosity over the
Mhm.
years. And so I think schooling might have something to do with that,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And so let's go back to the old days, I think, where we learn through discovery, through exploration, through connection, through talking, through, all these conversations that we can have in the classroom and at home, because they're really insightful if we slow down. And one
Yeah.
thing too, I think, when we become parents, we really do want to see things through our children's eyes, right? Like the first time they discover, a new favorite food, like they try banana for the first time, they love it. And, like you said, like time slows down in that moment because we're like, wow, they're really savoring. We're in that
Mhm.
experience with them. We feel the same joy. I mean, there's something to be said about that. If we can
Mm.
keep all learning experiences joyful and meaningful, imagine, like, I think students today wouldn't complain about how boring school is. They would
Mhm.
actually still be
Yeah.
self-directed learners, and that's what we want.
Yeah. And it's when children start school that I hear from parents who are asking me, how do I motivate my child? They're not motivated. How do I convince them that this is important? And I think you're right. I think part of it is the curiosity has gone because now it's like you need to do this and get this done. And it takes away that enjoyment of like, I wonder why this ball rolls differently on this plane versus that angle versus, different surface. We haven't done that enough with our kids. And they are naturally in awe of things and naturally wonder about things and curiosity, but we have to maintain that. And so I think it's really important. I also wonder about like extracurricular. I
Mhm.
hear a lot of parents talk about it's not just about what they're learning in preschool, but once class is over or the day is over, then they're going to different instrument, learning different instruments, and then it's learning a different language, perhaps, or learning or strengthening their reading skills in different classes. I've heard of many parents from different parts of the world that do that once the day is over, and so it's a very long day, and weekends are the same, very heavy in terms of different activities that they have to go to. Um, do you think we've gone a little bit overboard with that? And I covered over parenting or helicopter parenting in an article on our website. And there was a really interesting response from parents because many don't think that they are helicopter parenting or over parenting, as we say in the studies. But when we think about over planning, making decisions for a child, not allowing them to gain certain skills by having open-ended play or moments, to themselves, we are removing something from the self-determination theory, which is the autonomy, competence, and then the third one is belonging. But the first two, that is so important. And then we wonder why they can't problem solve later on, why they're not motivated. So all that to say, do you feel that we might be overdoing it when it comes to planning our child's weekends and weeknights?
Yeah, I understand where we're coming from.
Mm,
Again, I think parents today, if we have the means and resources, we want to give our children
sure.
as much as we
Mm,
can give them, right? We want them to be successful, whatever that means for each of us. But yes, I think overscheduling can have detrimental effects because, first of all, our lives are just rushed to
mm,
begin with. And so now we're packing more scheduled demands
mhm,
into everyone's day. It's not just hard for us, it's hard for our children too. And I wonder how many times did the child actually say, "Hey, mom, hey, dad, I want to do this," rather than us saying, you must
Right.
learn this, right?
Hmm.
And so again, I go back to the idea of whole child wellness. Okay, like
Hmm.
we're not just trying to fill their brains with knowledge and teach them all these skills that are important, but we're rushing to get all this done.
That too.
And I wonder, if we really want that deep learning, we have to slow down. We can't just do everything. We
Mhm.
can maybe dive deeper into something that they're truly interested in and encourage that instead. Maybe we're trying to cast a net, so to cover all the bases. Maybe we're saying,
Mhm.
okay, let's try this and that and see what catches on. But I think children should be part of that conversation, because then we will have their buy-in, right? Instead of them feeling like they have no control of their lives.
All right. Let's take a moment to pause and reflect on this first half of my conversation with Amy. What came to mind when I was having this conversation with her was this fast paced world that most of us live in. And so many parents that I've spoken with, because I give workshops in schools and at companies, so many parents that I speak with feel that if they are not being productive, if they are not doing something that they have deemed to be productive, then they are being lazy, or they're not doing what they should be doing. And sometimes this mindset trickles down to our kids. What I heard very loud and clear from Amy was this slowness, this stillness. And when a child is given time to breathe, time to explore a field with grass or a garden with soil and dirt, that is where the learning happens. But that can't happen if we, the adult, the parent, don't slow down time. And so, what I want to take from this is us questioning, where is there room in our life and in our day to slow things down? Even her example of circle time, you might be a parent and saying, well, I can't do circle time. Actually, we might be able to, and we can. I have 3 kids, and we have done circle time many times, to the point that when I stopped, my kids had asked me to start circle time over again. And so this can be at a strategic moment in your day. Maybe it's after you pick them up from school or daycare. Maybe you're a stay-at-home parent, and halfway through your day, or after or before their nap is when energy is through the roof and you need a moment to calm things down. Maybe you can bring in circle time in a way that just feels good for you. Remember that when we slow things down for a child, we're slowing things down for ourselves. And more people now are embracing this. I'm seeing this also. I'm in my 40s, and a lot of my friends are talking about like wanting to not do these extra hours at work and wanting to slow things down and be more present for their child. And so, if you often feel that you're rushing through things, and that's my reflection of the week actually with this episode, is how often are we keeping ourselves busy and our child versus doing something that is fulfilling? And if this question or this reflection really resonates, I have an activity that we're going to be doing with our members inside the Reflective Parent Club. And so this is going to be this Tuesday. I don't know what the 24th, so June 24th, that will be the reflection call of the week. So, what I've been doing is taking the podcast episode, digging deep into the research and to how we can reflect on this to grow as parents and build our self awareness and build a better environment for our child and for us, most importantly. Because when we are feeling better and less stressed and cope with our emotions better through emotion regulation skills, we can provide our child with a lot more. Because we have a lot more capacity to give. And so we can be more present and show up in a different way. And so if you want, you can get 7 days, everybody gets 7 days for free. And I know some parents I've spoken with said, well, it's summertime and I don't have the time to show up an hour every week. Well, if your kids are home, you're going to need more capacity and more emotion regulation skills. And so it might actually be a better time for you. And so if you are going to be home with your kids, even if you don't have to show up at like a webinar. Some of our parents are out for walks while they're listening to this 1 hour talk, and you can just speak through your AirPods or your headset. Some are at their lunch break and they're just showing up in an office somewhere and listening from their phone and contributing by chat rather than turning on their cameras. You can show up in the way that you want. Your child could be taking a nap and you put on your headset and you listen to what we have to say and grab your journal after they go to bed and write down your notes if you want to. You do it and show up the way that you want. I really suggest, if you are struggling with coping with your emotions and not showing up in the way that you want for your child, to give it a try for 7 days and show up to one of the calls. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this week. Like I said at the beginning, if you're a parent that also feels rushed most of the time, this is the episode that I want you to take in and say, where can I slow things down a little bit? Not just for myself, but mostly for my child who will get that opportunity to play. Am I putting all of these activities in their weekend and their weeknights to stay busy rather than us being home? And maybe we're going to be bored at the beginning. Maybe we won't have screen time, but that's okay. Think about, if I think back to my childhood, like I did with Amy, I think about all the wonderful ways that I played. Taking away screen time, TV times, games, video games. What are the memories that our child are going to have? It's okay if TV and screen time is part of their memory. I have wonderful memories of listening to the Flintstones and watching Sesame Street at lunchtime as well. But there was so much more that created and built that entire day for me. And it was mostly play. What are our children's childhood play memories going to be? Okay, let's move on with the next part of this conversation that's going to target a little bit more about inside the classroom. But even if you're not a teacher, there's a lot to learn from this. I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you on the other side with a scientific study that I want to share with all of you. Bye. What are some changes that you think are simple enough that many other preschools and even parents within their homes can start implementing?
Right. So, yeah, I definitely suggest with small changes because, again, it's too overwhelming to change everything that we do all at once. So, why don't we start in one place? So, for me, then, it's as simple as um, giving children more time for free play. Free play, meaning we don't control how they
Mm,
play. We let them make up their own rules. We let them figure out some of their own problems. And we can stay near to support,
mhm,
of course, depending on their age and ability. But, we give them more freedom in the day. And that also means incorporating downtime. I think a lot of us don't get that downtime. I mean, we are, as adults, need that too.
mhm,
And I'm not just saying, okay, they get to nap, right? I mean that giving them time to be slow in the classroom, even if it looks like they're just daydreaming, there's a lot of value to that. Sometimes we think we look at a child who's not participating in the way that we expect, and we think, okay, they're disengaged. But then we have to dig deeper because, that's through our adult lens. We think, oh, nothing's going on, but there could be a whole rich world of stories happening in this child's head, or maybe they just prefer to observe at first, and that's okay too. We really can't treat all children the same. But
right.
slowing down, that means shelving some of our teacher plans. Sometimes, if the class is showing us they need something different, I always think about um, teachers ask me this a lot, oh God, circle times are so like such a disaster. I'm trying to teach the calendar and they're just bouncing off the walls, and I tell them, you don't have to do circle time. And I think sometimes that's like a really radical thing to say based on some of the reactions I get. But, I think if it's not working, shelf it. I'm not
Mhm,
saying never do it again, but in the moment, we have to be present and responsive to what our children are needing. So if we keep pushing our own agenda, that's not going to work for anyone. So making space for slowness in the classroom daily, which maybe just means, instead of, we go to lunch at 12 because we do every day, that if they're still enjoying playing, if they're still reading a story, that we let that happen a little bit longer and delay
mhm.
lunch a little bit, because we're meeting their present needs.
I'm curious to know, thinking about that circle time example, sometimes behavior gets in the way of us slowing things down, whether we're a parent or an educator. So, how can we sort of support that with a child, who's maybe not enjoying it in the way that we envisioned in that
Right.
moment?
Okay, so when you're working with multiple children, I think it is hard to meet every individual need when it's a
Mm,
group experience. And so part of that is accepting that, that some children just won't be ready for circle time. Some children
right.
just won't be ready to learn the way we hope that they will, and adapting something different for them, or just accepting it and moving on. So this is
Mm,
an issue I see in circle times a lot because, as a teacher who's working with, let's say, 12, 15 children at a time, you're bound to lose someone's attention. And I think what we can do is we'll stop everything and call out that child and say, okay, we got to stop everything. What if we just let go a little bit? Let
mm,
that child fidget, let that child wander away, and continue with our plans with the rest of the children who are ready for circle time. So we don't have to, immediately throw everything out, depending on the situation. So that's one thing I think of. And then circle times too, I think a lot of times, they're not developmentally appropriate because we expect children to look a certain way during circle time. Like we expect
right.
them to sit neatly on the rug, crisscross
Hmm.
applesauce. For some reason, we think that's a marker of true learning, but it's not,
Right.
it's just appearances. And so again, we have to get to know the children who we serve and how they respond in different situations, how they prefer or not prefer to participate. Everyone participates differently,
Mm.
and honoring that they're all different.
Mm. I'm so happy that you brought that up because attention span is another thing that's so important and comes into this. I think that sometimes as parents, we have these unrealistic expectations for our kids, right? Where we expect the 2 year old to sit down during reading time at the library or wherever we are in the classroom and to just sit down and listen because it's such a good book, right? And we're like, how can you not? And then we see another child sitting down and we start comparing. But I love that you've said this because developmentally it is not easy. They want to move, they want to explore, they're curious to know it. They're listening to the book, sure, but what else is on the shelf, or what's behind that door, or what happens if I push this chair? And so they continue to be curious about their environment. I just want to say this, to parents listening, we have to be more aware of what our expectations are for our kids and ask ourselves the question, is this developmentally appropriate? So the circle time is such a good example, and I'm really happy that you brought that up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think about our expectations, and I used to
Mm,
have all kinds of expectations for my
mm,
children and, children that I work with in school. And I realized that they weren't meeting any of those expectations because they're not realistic. So why do we hold on to them, right? Why do we
yeah.
hold on to these ideas of what should work when
Hmm.
children are right in front of us showing us that it doesn't? Okay, so already we're sort of pitting ourselves against these really unrealistic visions of how young children are supposed to be. They are supposed to be active. They are supposed to be loud. They are supposed to touch everything, If we start from there, then we'll be more accepting of them because we'll know that's what we should expect.
Mm,
And I sometimes, I've worked at a variety of different schools and programs. Sometimes I walk into a classroom and they're eerily quiet. I really wonder what that's about. Because to me, that's
mm,
not showing engagement. That's not showing me learning. And I think like, okay, what's the culture of this classroom that makes this space so quiet and all the children so quiet? Because really, they should be talking. They should be moving around. They should be just tinkering with stuff all day long.
mm.
That's a natural state of children.
That's interesting because then somebody coming into that class might say like, "Wow, this is such a well-behaved classroom." And that's what
Mm,
is like the marker of like success, right? Like your child sits down for a really long time. Your child follows instructions and rules to the T, whereas you're looking for more of that exploration. And I love that we're talking about this because there's some parents that we have in Curious Neuron that come from different countries, and some of the countries that I've spoken, like the parents from these countries talk about being embarrassed if their child happens to like look around during a sports event and isn't following their coach, but they're 3 years old and, notice the butterfly on the soccer field. And so they went towards that rather than like sitting still and listening. But we forget again that this child is just naturally wanting to move around and explore. So it's just, we have to remind
yeah.
ourselves about that.
Yeah, so what I try to do there is, because I understand the public's perception of us as parents. Like anytime we step into a public space, we're
Hmm.
wondering, okay, how is my child going to act? And so of course that's stressful.
Yeah.
When I'm in a public space, when I'm in this grocery store line and a child is having a tantrum falling apart, I always try to look to that parent with empathy, with a
Hmm.
smile, with understanding so that they know it's okay. Like I don't want them to because some of us have that tendency, like then we kind of, act really harsh in public
Yeah,
because we're like
sure.
trying to show our child that's not okay.
Hmm.
Instead of kind of, understanding that maybe that situation is overwhelming. They've been
Hmm.
there a long time. They're tired, they're hungry, they're thirsty. So many reasons that they could
Yeah.
be falling apart. And so I think, again, it comes to this cultural shift that we're all hoping for, that if we can be kinder and more compassionate towards one another and show other people that it's okay, right?
Hmm.
Children aren't perfect, we aren't either, so why
Hmm.
why are we striving for whatever that is? And certainly being quiet and obedient, I mean, that's going to lead to a life of people pleasing. And I know a lot of us are
Hmm.
recovering people
Yes.
pleasers, right? We're trying to shake
Yeah.
all those tendencies because it is stressful, it is hard to live up to. And so let's give our children the gift of honoring who they are. And yes, everyone has things that they need to work on,
Hmm.
but let's do it with patience and understanding, because again, when we kind of force children into complying with our demands, we can rupture that relationship. We can hurt their self-esteem, and
Hmm.
so those are deeper issues that will continue to um, impact their life as they grow up. And I want children to know that they can make mistakes and they're fine. I'm not going to love them less
Mm.
because I make mistakes. We make mistakes, right? Like we hope the same for ourselves. So it really
Mm.
begins with self compassion. I say this a lot too, really, really accepting our flaws, accepting that we're going to mess up sometimes, but doing it from a place of love. If we do it from a place
Right.
of love, I don't think we can go wrong.
And it's such an important reminder for all of us too as parents, and yeah, it's not easy though.
No.
I wanna I wanna be mindful of your time, but I also have one last question. You had one post that again here at Curious Neuron we focus a lot about around emotional intelligence and emotion regulation skills that many of us parents didn't learn, and so now that we're parents and we have to teach this to our kids, it's hard because we don't know how to do that. One thing that's really hard is the self awareness piece, and so you had a post where talked about like asking kids like let's check in with your body, and it meant so much to me like seeing that because I think it's something that first we need to learn as adults and we need to check in with our body, and when we stop we actually realize okay my breathing is shallow or my heart is racing a little faster, but again we're so busy with this fast paced life that we don't take the time. So you're saying to introduce this to kids. How do you do that with the kids, and what have been some like do some kids start noticing little things about themselves in moments?
Oh, yes. So the more we practice, the better we get. And so that's a good thing. Even, I didn't have this learning too when I was growing up. So I think many of us are struggling because it's new for us.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean we can't grow. And in fact, I love that we get to grow with the children, that they teach us
right.
so much by being with them. And so part of that is just daily practice. And I'm not saying you have to do it at any certain part of the day, but it's just noticing. Again, it starts with knowing the children, but just noticing when they're maybe a little bit out of sorts,
Hmm.
and coming a little closer and just say, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? Sometimes they'll, say, I have a stomach ache or I'm tired.
All right.
Those are the beginnings of these kinds of conversations. And then I do my own practice too. So, because this is new to me, so I have to be really conscious. Like whenever I feel a feeling now, let's say it's guilt or
Hmm.
embarrassment, I stop to notice how that feels in my body. So
Hmm.
if I'm remembering correctly, when I feel guilt, I feel a hot flash in the back of my neck and sort
Hmm.
of like tingling in my shoulders. It could
Right.
be unique for each of us, but
Hmm.
that just means that we slow down. to acknowledge the feeling that we're feeling. You know, we can name it. I'm feeling guilty because dot dot dot.
Hmm.
I'm feeling it right now in my body in these places, and so we can also grow our own emotional understanding. And with that, you know, we're practicing with children again as regularly as possible. You know, because I think some of us wait until they're already in a heightened state to try these things. And sometimes that's really hard, right? We ask them to
Right.
take the deep breath when they're already so
Not the right
angry and
time.
then they,
Yeah.
right, exactly. And so we really do have to pick and choose. And again, it
Yeah.
takes a very observant adult to know how to do this,
Hmm.
but we can get there. We just need to practice.
And you're right. We need to do this with our kids. And there's a beauty in that learning too. It's okay that we don't know it, but knowing the steps and saying, I want to teach this to my child, or I want to model this, sorry, for my child, I think that that helps us realize that we might not get it right away, but we're going to learn with them.
Yes.
I so appreciate that. Thank you, Amy, for taking the time to chat with me today. Do you have a blog or social media that people can follow you at? Or maybe there are some people, I know we have a lot of listeners in California.
Mhm.
Anything that we can learn more from you or get in touch if you're willing to share.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. So, you know, I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I post all about child development, teaching, all that good stuff. And you can find me there. And you can also find me on my website. It's called theworkofplay.com. So,
Mm.
again, I really want to center play as something so important. And I'm always working at understanding play better. So, you can find me there. I have lots of resources. But you can also feel free to message me. You know, this is something that I'm also working on myself. I love to hear from other people and their perspectives and their life stories because we get to learn together. So please reach out.
All right. I just wanted to cover very quickly in a few minutes a study that I believe we should all know about. So it's called Learning Through Play at School, a framework for policy and practice. It was written by Rachel Parker and colleagues in Frontiers of Education in 2022. And what I wanted to kind of emphasize from this study, so it talks about not just the fact that kids are learning many important skills like social skills and emotion regulation skills through play. And when you think about it, it's because of the presence of the adult there. So if you think about pretend play, a child has to learn how to organize the scenario or the scene that they're trying to build, right? I'm the doctor, you're the patient. I'm going to show up in the room and have my notepad, and you're going to have an injury of some sort, right? There's planning and organizing. These are executive function skills, just to give you an example. And then if the child is playing on their own at home with you, and they say to you, I want you to be the doctor and I'm the patient, and you're like, I actually want to be the patient today, and they get really upset, that's building social emotion regulation skills. And so when they're upset or disappointed or they don't want to wait their turn, you're building so many skills. They're learning how to be patient. They're learning how to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. Maybe they wanted to be the doctor and their sibling wants to be the doctor. How do you support them in knowing who's going to be doctor first? What are the skills that we are helping your child build in these very important moments? So this is when they're playing pretend with other kids or yourself. But more than that, what this study reminds us of is that when a child is given the time to, let's say, go for a walk with you, and for the 20, 30 minutes of that walk, they are picking up the tiniest little pebble they can find on the floor or the smallest little twig that they see on the grass. That is learning. They are curious. They are allowing their brain to look at something and observe. That's scientific thinking. And so if we can give our children more time to do that, to, like I said to Amy, like putting water in a bucket and throwing a leaf inside. Does it float? Does it sink? You can be the facilitator, the guide to their thinking, but let them take charge and lead the way to learning. They are masters of play. We are here to learn from them. We were masters of play, but life got in the way. And so we have to give them that space to explore. What's so important to, in all of this is that sometimes we rush things. I've done it. I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad. I have done this so many times when my kids were young. We'd go out for a walk, but I knew we had to come home because one of the kids had to take a nap and they didn't want to nap in their stroller. And so I knew I had to rush back home. Or maybe there was a meal I had to prepare. Or maybe there was some sort of event that we had to prepare. There was always a reason to rush and come back home, which would change the way that they were playing. It doesn't last long. My kids are 6, 8 and 10. And that kind of play, that slowness of life that they introduced to me when they were young, where I would just sit beside them and they wouldn't really interact with me more than that, but they would like to play with me beside them. It doesn't last that long. And when I was with them, that's when I could observe what they were doing. Maybe they were taking a little toy and putting it inside a box and then opening it and taking that toy out and putting another toy inside. I was there to just be with them. And you don't always have to be with them. But if you can schedule 10 minutes a day to be with them, maybe it'll help you slow down. We get stuck in our minds. We're sitting with our child, but we're not present. We're thinking about what needs to be done. We're thinking about stress about work. We're thinking about an argument we had with our partner, or maybe a parent or an in law, and we're not present. And it's not for guilt, but I've experienced it and I see how important slowing things down is not only for them, but for us. This study also talks about brain development, right? So play also, I'm going to read this from the study because I don't want to make a mistake, but play also stimulates the production of protein responsible for the differentiation and growth of new neurons and synapses. So this is a heavy sentence that just explains how we want our child to build new connections in their brain. And the more experience they have from play specifically, the more of these connections that they are going to build, which reminds us just how important play is for their brain development. So social skills, emotion regulation, the development of their brain, executive functions, patience and waiting, not being impulsive, all of that is going to come through play. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And some of you have reached out to me to tell me that you are enjoying this new model also of the podcast. We're going to try to cut down the length of the episodes a little bit more so that it's about 30 minutes, but with the same model of me showing up halfway through with a reflection and at the end with a study. I hope you're enjoying this. Please reach out. Send me an email at info@curiousneuron.com. Come see me on Instagram, curious_neuron. Reach out to me somehow. And I hope I get to see some of you inside the Reflective Parent Club. You can click the link in the show notes. Try it free for 7 days. And I will see you next week on Sunday again. We're testing Sundays out. So I hope you have a wonderful week. See you next time. Bye.